Adam, thank you for coming on the podcast.
It's a real pleasure.
We always like to start with how people got to the point where they are today. You have a very interesting history on the issues you've been involved in and the way that your career has gone. Tell us the story of how you became the person you are today, involved in everything that you are.
Well, I started as a lawyer in D.C., like a lot of people, and I worked in private law firms and also in the FCC for a while. I'm back in private law firms, mostly concentrating on communications and antitrust law. And then I got a position in academia, and I've been a professor at Michigan State University for coming on 20 years. So early on, I sort of took a different point of view when it comes to some communications issues that became important, such as Section 230. I became one of the few academics that really was very much against what that provision would become, which would become a sort of immunity for the major platforms to deplatform people. And I thought it was a threat to free speech. I think as early as 2016, you begin to see that the Silicon Valley had emerged as arbiters of what is true and good and right in our society, and no one elected them, and they in fact represent a very sort of parochial minority, and that became to me a very important issue. So I began to write about it, and then one day out of the blue I get a call from White House personnel asking me if I want to get involved in the National Telecommunications and Information Authority. And in fact, I have a background in it. I mean, I'm an expert in that sounds pompous, but
you are. We grant you the title of expert.
Yeah, great. In communications law, I've spent 20 years doing telecom. I'm familiar with spectrum issues. So it was something that seemed really interesting. And I said, sure, I'll give it a try. Why not? And I started out there as deputy, and to my surprise, out of the blue, President Trump revived the executive order on Section 230, and so all of a sudden NTIA became the center of this of those issues at the time. And I later was made acting administrator of NTIA, and then in the last month or so of the Trump administration, I moved over to Justice as Deputy Associate Attorney General.
So to kind of lay the groundwork for our listeners who may not be super familiar with Section 230, aside from all the libertarians screaming about it on Twitter, what is Section 230? How does it apply to a lot of these big tech companies? How should conservatives be thinking about it?
Yeah, the way libertarians talk about it, I believe it was handed down by Moses, written in stone tablets 2,000 years ago. Is that right?
The 11th commandment.
Yeah, the 11th. Well, it's really a terribly misunderstood and statute, and I'm happy to talk about it. But also, I think conservatives should remember it's a sideshow, in the sense that it's very important. It should be reformed, but the bigger issue is that we have these huge tech platforms that just exercise a disproportionate power in our society. And that's really the main problem we have to get at. But yeah, but getting to Section 230. So Section 230 started as really an effort to encourage platforms to get rid of pornography. I mean, if you look, it was part of the Communications Decency Act, and there are two parts of it. One of which was declared unconstitutional, but 230 survived. And 230 said, look, if you read the congressional record, there are all these congressmen and senators getting very exercised about pornography. It's hard to remember. In fact, I imagine you guys don't because you're so young. But in the 1990s, it was a horrifying thing that 14 or 15-year-old Johnny could import into his bedroom all the pornography in the world. This was a very different sort of phenomena that people have experienced before, and people are rightly upset. I think they should be rightly upset. I think the prevalence of pornography has really transformed the relationships with sexes in ways that we as a society hasn't really thought about, and we had no control over. It was all determined by the tech gods. So So the problem was at the time in the 1990s. Again, this is ancient history for you. Right after they started writing in cuneiform, we had dial-up internet, and this is what the congressmen and senators were thinking about in the age of AOL and Prodigy, and they were walled gardens, if you remember, and they had bulletin boards. And there was this one case that said, look, Prodigy is advertising itself as a family-friendly internet service provider. So they're going to edit all the bulletin boards, take rid of the dirty words and bad words and dirty pictures. And there's one case that said, look, if Prodigy does that, then it's going to be legally liable for the entire bulletin board. So all the libel or defamation or criminal threats, they will be liable for. And of course, the ISP industry didn't like that ruling. So what did they do? They went to Congress and said, get us a new law. And thus they were given Section 230. And Section 230 said, look, if you take down dirty pictures, it's obscene, lewd, lascivious, extremely violent, or harassing, you're not responsible for your whole platforms. And that's what it was about. That's all it was about. It was to say, look, if these walled gardens want to kick out porn, they're not going to be liable for every comment on their bulletin boards. But what it's become, thanks to some really bad court rulings, which I think Justice Thomas in a last year in a recent statement on certiorari pointed out, it's become a get out of jail free for liability for anything. So they can kick you off and they can deplatform you on the basis of your race or religion. They're immune from civil rights law. They're immune from even contract law, thanks to Section 230. So that has to be reformed. But to me, in a way, that's a sideshow. The real more important issue is, can we as a society re-exert ourselves over the central sort of nervous system of our society so we can understand how ideas are being exchanged and make sure that it's truly reflective of American society.